Yeah, I mean, what you're describing there is a clear motivation within the buying organization to get value and to understand. And it's not, as I said, it's a very, very meaningful spend for almost all organizations. You know, the figures I've heard kind of from experts in the procurement sector are that services spend on average across all different types of organizations across the world is roughly 50% of spend.
Yep.
Um, Obviously, in a manufacturing heavy organization versus a bank, for example, they're going to be a different skew, but on average. So it clearly is very meaningful trying to get to that value. And so people are addressing it, and it makes sense to address it, but it's kind of always fallen into the too difficult box previously. And this is where AI, dedicated technologies, dedicated expertise can help move that along and solve that problem. But I do agree that flexibility is also an important part of it, because you can't necessarily just instantly put everything in one single framework. You've got to move along the tracks with this type of thing. Um, just one other thing that I thought was quite interesting was another thing that causes there to be crossover with knowledge based services procurement versus contingent workforce is ultimately it's still work being done, and
Yep.
this is still work being done by people
Yep.
using AI, not the AI doing the work. Um, and so ultimately, that requires things like the ability to track which resources you have on the pitch, as it were. Who's accessing our systems? Who's got right to enter the building? Where are these people? Who's doing X, Y, and Z? So I think that is another reason why sometimes it can get kind of confused and crossed over with the contingent workforce element, where that is clearly a significant thing that has to be managed in the contingent workforce space. But it's there's definitely still that separation that needs to take place, because yes, you need to know who's on the pitch. You need to have compliance and control around the people that are working maybe on your site or using your equipment, for example. But that's where, so that is relevant to an individual because they might need a badge to enter your office, for example. But actually, if you're getting a piece of time-based delivery as part of a statement of work, that shouldn't really matter which individual it is. It might matter that it's a senior associate doing that work for that many hours because that's what contracted, but it doesn't matter whether it's Sarah or Pete. So that's a subtle difference, but you can see why it's confused at the moment. And it's partly because, as I say, it's quite nascent of people trying to get on top of this. And some of the drivers are the regulatory side of things, where it's pushed people across into this kind of quasi statement of work, and then now people are saying, well, that's not good enough. We need to separate them out. So it is moving down the path of evolution, but it's still fairly early on in its stages. Which is why I think it makes this kind of conversation particularly interesting, certainly to me and to other people I know, hopefully in the industry, because it's not really the sort of thing that I've heard being spoken about that much. I don't know about you.
Well, it's interesting because you said that, well, listen, with a contingent staff augmentation worker, we we're going to charge hours, right? We want to check out hours. Versus with SOW project oriented work, we're going to check that things get done, right? There's a big difference there. The things getting done is an outcome. The hours that are being charged is not an outcome, right? It's an input to receiving value or quality work out of those hours, right? And the assessment of, well, how much work was done by the staff aug worker, and did they get exactly what they were brought on to do? Are they checking that box? And a lot of times, and I had a little bit of a back and forth on LinkedIn about this week, was, well, are we capturing that information on the staff aug worker? Well, kind of, yeah. But the only way is through worker quality surveys that are generally voluntary response and have about a 25% response rate. And also are very, very subjective by manager to manager, going to assess different folks in very different ways. Versus an SOW, where you're talking about an outcome and a deliverable. Did that deliverable get met as per the contract? Yes. Usually that's pretty darn binary, right? Yes or no. Versus the staff aug worker, did they get done what they were brought on to do for the contract? Well, it's not a contract, right? They've been brought on to work 40 hours a week while some somebody else is out or on the special project that is a short-term basis, and they made it to the end of their assignment. It was not an involuntary or voluntary turnover. And they're now gone, and we liked them. And you hear that 25% of the time. So you need to really consider, okay, are we going to have a policy again to require all hiring managers to give us worker quality feedback on their workers? I don't see why that would be something you say no to. That's something you say, well, yeah, obviously, we're going to spend 30 million, 20 million, $100 million on contingent labor spend. I want to make sure that our worker quality scores are coming in through the roof, right? If I have the ability to say yes or no on projects, I should have a very similar ability to assess my contingent workforce and the suppliers that they're coming from in a very similar type of a manner. It might be different because we know that projects and staff aug, as we've talked about for the last hour, are not the same thing. However, you should still have data on which you can make decisions going forward.